But anyway, let's get down to the business of Gideon. We are in chapter 6, and we're starting a whole new character and a whole new story. And Gideon is actually very different, totally different from any of the people we have met until now. Until now, we have met a few judges, and we have some of them very little that we know about them. For example, we met Othniel, the son of Kanaz, and we have a little teeny story of about, a couple of verses about him. We had Ehud ben Gera, Ehud, the fellow that, he stabs the Eglon, the Moabite king, the big fat king, stabs him right in his big fat tummy. So that's a nice story, okay? But it's one story. We don't know anything about all the other things he did. We just know that one story. Then we meet Shamgar. Again, what do we know about him? The guy seems to be working with cattle, and he kills a bunch of Philistines. 2 verses, and we're done with him. Then, of course, the last person that we met was Deborah, and there we have 2 chapters. But again, it's basically one story. It is a much more fleshed out story than we saw before. We do get to encounter a lot more of her character. We understand her relationship with Barak, the general, and of course, that wonderful song of praise that she sings not only fills in the story, but gives us a much better sense of what is going on at the time and what Deborah's role is. When we get to Gideon, we're getting to a much more involved story. We're going to learn much more about who Gideon was, how he got started, and we will be dealing with a number of different issues that he will be dealing with. So it's we get a much fuller sense of who Gideon was and what his role was. So that is just a brief introduction. So let's start reading in chapter 6. Now, the first 2 sections in chapter 6, verses 1 through 10, essentially set forth what is known as an exposition. An exposition, very common in the Bible. Before we have a story, before the story begins, we have a bit of background. Something is presented to us in order for us to get background information. And this is what we have at the beginning of chapter 6. But what we have here is actually 2 separate expositions, 2 different short background stories, if you will, each one relating background on different aspects of what's going on. Okay, so let's start reading. Then the Israelites did what was offensive to the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Midianites for 7 years. So first of all, let's go back to the very end of chapter 5. And the last few words of chapter 5 tell us that the land rested or was in peace for 40 years. And as we'll see from what we saw until now and throughout the book of Judges, this idea of the land resting and for a given number of years is a very, very important element in enabling us to understand how successful a given judge was, or how successful a given period of time was. In the case of Deborah, they came up against an enemy, a Canaanite enemy. They defeated that enemy, and then we learned that basically for 40 years, things are fine. What that means, though, is things are fine, shall we say, politically or physically, okay? We know that for 40 years, they're not troubled by enemies. They defeated that enemy, and for 40 years, they don't have any other problems, which of course is a reference to the success of that previous judge. However, what we don't know is what was going on spiritually during that 40 years. And here we get a sense in the first chapter that at some point in those 40 years, maybe the tail end, maybe for quite some time, it's not clear, is the Israelites revert to very bad behavior, okay? And as a result, God punishes them and enables the Midianites to conquer them or to control them for 7 years. And now we're going to see, and one of the things that is very, very interesting about these first scriptures is one of the most beautiful descriptions of a situation. And one of the things that you will realize whenever we're talking about the Bible, I've mentioned this a few times, when you're reading a novel, okay, a good story, a modern story, you will have a great deal of description of how people are feeling, what their motivations are. if they're angry. And there'll be many, many adjectives used to describe feelings. They were angry, they were frustrated, they couldn't believe what was going on. They yelled and screamed, they threw a few dishes, and oh my gosh, and can you believe it? Okay, this is the nature of modern writing. Biblical writing is very, very precise and very concise. And you will very rarely have expressions of emotion. In fact, most of the time, except for when we will be told that God is angry, we will be told that God has mercy, okay? But when we talk about individual people, we don't really hear much of emotions. And we'll see in these next few verses some wonderful descriptions of situations that immediately enables you to understand what people must have been feeling, experiencing, what their lives were like. So let's see what this is. The hand of the Midianites prevailed over Israel, and because of Midian, the Israelites provided themselves with refuges in the caves and strongholds of the mountains. Okay, they dug, okay, it's whatever. Basically what it's saying is here is they dug tunnels in the mountains and caves and strongholds. They burrowed underground. Now, it doesn't say why they burrowed underground, except that because of the Midianites. But think about this for the second. If you're going to burrow underground, you're frightened. You're terrified. You're trying to escape a terrible oppressor, and you have nowhere to turn. You have nowhere to go. There is no safe place. Every place across the land makes you vulnerable, and then you go underground. I mean, I think about, in our history, some of the most extreme times. I know, for example, I don't know if any of you have ever been to Susia. Susia is a community in Judea, but it is built right next to the ruins of an ancient community called Susia. It was a Jewish community ranging from about the 4th century to the 12th century. Its most active period, though, probably ended somewhere around the 8th or 9th century. Okay, and one of the things that's so interesting about Susia is that there's an amazing system of underground passageways. Not just passageways, but full homes and rooms that were built in caves underground. And when archaeologists first uncovered this, one of the things that they were able to learn from that was that this was a time of great Roman oppression, which is something they know anyway, okay? And what you're able to see by seeing these tunnels and these dwelling places underground is how that played out in the lives of ordinary people. People were no longer able to live in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the center of Roman rule, and so therefore they fled. They fled to the outskirts, and if you go to Susia, it's way south of Jerusalem. It's south of Hebron. It's at the edge of the desert, and they fled there. But even when they're in the outskirts, they're still not safe enough, and they end up having to burrow underground. So you see the same thing here going on. Once you know that these people are digging underground, burrowing underground, you know there's enormous oppression, and there's absolutely no place for them to hide above ground. There's no safe place. They've got to go underground. Verse 3, after the Israelites had done their sowing, Midian, Amalek, and the Kedemites would come up and raid them. They would attack them and destroy the produce of the land all the way to Gaza and leave no sustenance in Israel, not a sheep or an ox or an ass. So first of all, we learned initially that the nation here that is persecuting the people is Midian. But here we have two additional groups. We have Amalek and the sons of Kedem. And these three, what they all have in common is they're all nomadic groups, okay? When we read the story of Deborah, we saw that there was a king, Yavin, king of the Canaanites, and he was ruling the roost. He had a general, Sisera, and then Deborah and Barak had to gather an army to come up against their army. In this case, we have nomadic groups that are, they're plunderers, they're robbers. And this is, by the way, something that we see certainly, if we talk about today in Israel, Bedouin culture, Now there are many Bedouins today that are law-abiding and etc. But if you go back over the centuries, the land of Israel during the Ottoman Empire and even before, there were very few cities and very few areas that was actually settled. And the people that kind of were running the roost, so to speak, were these nomadic tribes that roamed the land, took what they pleased, no rule of order, okay? And you have that same situation here. It's not so much a kingdom with a king that sends his army against another army, but here you have these nomadic tribes that just kind of spread across the land and take whatever they see. So here we see that when they grow crops, in comes these tribes and just take it all, like locusts. They seize it all. They seize their animals. Verse 5, for they could come up with their livestock and the tents swarming as thick as locusts, and they and their camels were innumerable. Thus they would invade the land and ravage it. This is people who don't care about the land. They don't want to settle their land. All they want to do is sustain themselves at the expense of everybody else and everybody's land. And this is a whole different kind of enemy, okay? Israel was reduced to utter misery by the Midianites, and the Israelites cried out to the Lord. Okay, so here we have a very important exposition telling us about the physical situation, a different kind of enemy that we've encountered until now, and a very, very difficult economic situation, terrible, just no relief anywhere, okay? And of course, as a result, the Israelites cry out to God. Now, verse 7, we get another understanding, background story of what's going on. When the Israelites cried to the Lord on account of Midian, the Lord sent a prophet to the Israelites who said to them, thus said the Lord, the God of Israel, I brought you up out of Egypt and freed you from the house of bondage. I rescued you from the Egyptians and from all your oppressors. I drove them out before you, gave you their land, and I said to you, I, the Lord, am your God. You must not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell, but you did not obey me. So first of all, now we learn something about the spiritual situation of the Israelites at this time. We knew a bit about it in verse 1 when we learned that they did bad. They did what was offensive, but we don't exactly know what they did. What was offensive? Were they murdering people? Were they robbing people? No, what we find out here, what did they do? They worshiped the gods of the Amorites, because this is the one commandment that is mentioned here. I said to you, you must not worship the gods of the Amorites, but you did not obey me. So this already gives us a sense of what the problem was. We can also compare this little story here with a very similar story that we encountered in chapter 2, the very beginning of chapter 2. And here we have, now let's remember, the book of Judges begins after the land has been conquered, and they didn't finish conquering the land at the end of the book of Joshua. They conquered the land as much as they have, but not enough. They mostly settled where they need to settle, but not completely, okay? And what do we learn in chapter 2, the very beginning? An angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I brought you up from Egypt, and I took you into the land which I had promised an oath to your fathers, and I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And you, for your part, must make no covenant with the inhabitants of the land. You must tear down their altars, but you have not obeyed me. Look what you have done, okay? At this state of time, we don't have an indication, okay, that the Israelites are actually worshiping pagan gods. What we know is that they haven't finished conquering the land, and they did not drive out all the pagan nations from their midst. And this is what is being criticized here, okay? And therefore, what does it say? Therefore, I have resolved not to drive them out before you. They shall become your oppressors, and their gods shall be a snare to you. Okay, so here we have a warning of again, we're going to say, is this an angel? Is a prophet? We had discussed it then, but we have a warning that if you continue not driving out these people, eventually their God shall be a snare to you. Now, what happens when this angel or whoever this is says this to the Israelites? They immediately weep. They offer sacrifices. Okay. So here we have a situation where on the one hand, you have a sense of weakness, not evil in the nation, a weakness. They have not completed the job. And when this angel, again, the word here is a malach, and a malach, and we discussed this then, can be, literally a malach means a messenger. A malach can be a heavenly messenger in the form of an angel, or a malach can be a heavenly messenger who's actually a human being in the form of a prophet, okay? So what we see here in our chapter, in chapter 6, it's very specific here in verse 8, this is a prophet, this isn't an angel, but it's saying very similar words. And many people believe, also because of the similarity between chapter 6, verse 8 and chapter 2, verse 1, that indeed in both cases we're talking about a human being. We're talking about a prophet. Also in chapter 2, there was a prophet, also here in chapter 6. So we have very similar situations, but there is a glaring difference between the two situations. Whereas in chapter 2, just in anticipation of what could happen, the warning that the Israelites get that these pagan gods will become a snare, here, where the pagan gods have already become the snare, where they're already worshiping the pagan gods, what response do we get from the nation of Israel? Nothing. We learn the prophet here says, but you did not obey me. We have a very specific statement. We know already that they have been worshiping pagan gods, but no crying, no repentance, no nothing. Not yet, not at this point, okay? So these are the two situations that begin are the introduction to Gideon's story. One, that there is a terrible physical, political situation with these nomadic tribes that are just making their lives miserable, and also a very problematic spiritual situation where they're worshiping pagan gods. And now we have the beginning of the story of Gideon. An angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth, or the oak of Ophrah, which belonged to Joash of the Aviezer family. His son Gideon was then beating out wheat inside a winepress in order to keep it safe from the Midianites. Okay, so first of all, in this case, we have the same word here, malach, as we did as chapter 2, but here, especially since it is in contrast to the immediate verses just previous, where we talk about a prophet, it is fairly clear here that this indeed is a heavenly messenger. This is an angel, okay? So whereas we have a prophet coming to all of Israel without much effect, in verse 11, we now have an angel appearing only to Gideon. Now, what do we have with this? He's sitting in Ophrah. And we learn that Ophrah is the place where the Gideon family lives. It's the actually Ezri family. And they live in Ophrah. Now, there are two different Ophrahs. Some of you may have visited with me in a Jewish community today called Ophrah, which is just north of Bethel. That Ophrah is in the tribe of Benjamin. It is not this Ophrah, okay? There was another Ophrah, and Gideon is from the tribe of Manasseh. And so there is a second Ophrah. Where exactly it is a matter of discussion. There are people who say it is very close to Shechem, and there are people who say that it is further north, closer to where a lot of Gideon's activity will be, closer actually in the Galilee. Also in the tribe of Manasseh, but the northern part of the tribe of Manasseh. One thing is interesting, in the community of Itamar, which is just east of Shechem, there is a tomb sort of thing, and tradition has it that that is Gideon's tomb, okay? So if indeed that's Gideon's tomb, that would strengthen the idea that his Ophrah is very close to Shechem, and then of course there's the others that see it differently, but we don't really know, it really doesn't matter. Anyway, but look at this, again, the details of the story that are told to us tell us so much. He is beating wheat inside a wine press. This is consistent with what we learned about their building caves and going on underground. You don't usually go into a wine press to beat wheat. You beat wheat outside, okay? You gather it from the fields, and then you have a threshing floor outside. But no, he's bringing it into his wine press because the wine press is in a building. Now, many wine presses were also outside. Okay, but I guess this one is inside, and that is why he was able to go in there. So again, we have this expression of how fearful everyone is, and the only way they can hope to get any food is if they kind of manage to get it inside. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, valiant warrior." Oh, I love this in Hebrew. Hashem imcha gibor achayil. Lord is with you. Is there a more powerful statement than that for an angel to communicate to somebody? And Gideon said to him, "Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why has all this befallen us? Where are all his wondrous deeds about which our fathers told us, saying, truly the Lord brought us up from Egypt. Now the Lord has abandoned us and delivered us into the hands of Midian." So Gideon, he's not a shy fellow, okay? Excuse me. He's not afraid to question God. Now, the truth of the matter is, at this point, he's not quite sure, who's talking to him, and is this guy really a messenger of God? And we'll see afterwards that he was doubtful. But in any case, he's immediately questioning. He says, "Okay, if God is with me, why am I having so many problems?" Okay, and of course, that is a very, very normal response. And I love these types of dialogue in the Bible. Very often, people teach about how God is wonderful, God is so glorious, God is so high, and as if we human beings have absolutely no right to ask any questions. We have no right to question, and that's absolutely wrong. There's so many places in the Bible when we see people actually questioning God. So if you can question God, you can certainly question your teachers. Okay, and that's a very, very important thing. God has never been afraid of questions. Okay, of course, the questions need to come from a place of true desire to understand, and not from a place of ridicule or something else with that kind of negative connotation. But anyway, but again, very interesting what he says. He's saying very similar to what the prophet has said just before, but he's not quoting the prophet. He's quoting our fathers. And this tells you also something about Gideon. Gideon is a man who is part of an unbroken chain of tradition. He knows what God had spoken to Moses and to the Israelites in the desert. He knows what was written in the Bible. He knows what was written in Joshua, because this is what he's saying. He says, we have this tradition that was passed on to us from our fathers about what God did in Egypt. Now we're talking, this is already many, many years later, and yet he's still clinging to this tradition, but he's saying, well, we're not seeing exactly that kind of behavior out of God right now. Okay, and what's the response? The Lord turned to him. Now, here it's very interesting, and we're going to see in this story, which of course then strengthens that concept here, that indeed in this section we are talking about an angel, not about a prophet, because here alternately the speaker is referred to as God or as an angel. So when we have an angel, that is it's certainly not God. It's a spiritual entity that is speaking through with God's voice. An angel has no will of its own. An angel can only be a mouthpiece, so to speak, for God, and that is how we're seeing it here as well. The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength of yours and deliver Israel from the Midianites. I herewith make you my messenger." Now, what does this mean? The Lord turned to him and said, there are those who say what this means is that at this point, there's an actual revelation to Gideon. It was not just an angel who he saw in front of him talking, but there was this sense of revelation as if God himself spoke to him and he felt. There are others who say, no, it's the continuing of the same conversation. He said to him, "Please, my Lord, how can I deliver Israel?" Okay, so first of all, he's getting a little bit more respectful. "Please, my Lord, okay, how can I deliver Israel? Why, my clan is the humblest in Manasseh, and I am the youngest in my father's household." Now, one of the things that's brilliant about this in Hebrew that you completely miss in the translation, he says as follows in Hebrew. He says, when the word that is used for "I am of the humblest clan in Manasseh," the word for clan or family is alpi. Okay, alpi comes from the word elef, which is 1,000, and it is also a word that is used to reflect family. But he is clearly also referring to the blessings that were given by Moses at the end of Deuteronomy to the tribe of Joseph, because in that blessing, it says, referring to Ephraim and Manasseh, the two sons of Joseph, it says, and they are the 10,000s of Ephraim, they are the thousands of Manasseh. And the word thousands of Manasseh is alfei Manasseh. So here he talks about alpi Manasseh, and there it's alfei Manasseh, and it's from the same root, and it's clearly he's using these words as a reference, as if to say, God blessed my tribe. We were supposed to be the thousands of Manasseh, and look how poor and unfortunate we are, okay? But he's using that to also say, why me? Why me? You know, I'm from the smallest family. I'm the youngest. You know, it's by the way, very similar if you think about it. When Samuel comes to anoint David, David is out in the fields. They don't even think about him. He's a kid. He's the youngest in the family. And who is it that God chooses? The youngest, okay? And so we have this idea that already we start seeing here. When God chooses a leader, he's not necessarily the biggest, strongest, the most powerful, the oldest of the family. It is just this, you know, this very humble kind of beginnings. Verse 10, verse 16. The Lord replied, I will be with you, and you shall defeat Midian to a man. And he said to him, if I have gained your favor, give me a sign that it is you who are speaking to me. Do not leave this place until I come back to you and bring out my offering and place it before you. And he answered, I will stay until return. So he's already believing, but he needs a sign. And we'll see this continue. Gideon is constantly asking for signs, okay? That's very interesting because it is not seen here as some kind of problem with his faith. He really does believe in God. There's no question he believes in God. But, and I think this is something we can all relate to. You're hearing this word, he's hearing this word. How does he know this is really the word of God? He's clearly faithful to God. He knows the traditions that have been written in the Torah have been passed down through the generations, but he needs to be sure that what he is hearing is indeed the word of God. One of the things, so anyway, he tells him, he says, just wait here. And this also reminds us similar to a kind of story that we'll read later on when we learn about Samson and the initial revelation of the angel to Samson's mother. It's a similar kind of thing of how it is that Samson's mother, particularly his father, will realize that this indeed is an angel. It's a very similar kind of story. Anyway, so Gideon goes and he prepares a kid and bread, and he comes back, he puts the soup, etc., and he comes back to the angel. The angel of God said to him, take the meat and the unleavened bread, put them on the yonder rock, and spill out the broth. He did so. The angel of the Lord held out the staff that he carried and touched the meat and the unleavened bread with its tip. A fire sprang up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread, and the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. Then Gideon realized that it was an angel of the Lord, and Gideon said, alas, O Lord God, for I have seen an angel of the Lord face to face, okay? And this idea of face to face is very, very important. God says about Moses that he is the only man that he spoke to face. Very similar also when Jacob struggles with that man the night before he encounters Esau. Also, when he realizes it's an angel, there is this idea of, I have seen the Lord face to face when he has seen this angel. But the Lord said to him, all is well, have no fear, you shall not die. So Gideon built there an altar to the Lord and called it Adonai Shalom, Lord of Peace. To this day it stands in Ophrah of the family of Abiezri. Okay, so I see we have reached the end of our time, and what we have here, of course, is the introduction to Gideon. How does Gideon get to be the judge? How is he appointed? We have a sense of his character. We see he is humble, he is faithful, but at the same time, he's very inquisitive. He doesn't take everything at face value. He's looking for signs, he's looking for proof. But when he does see the angel kind of disappear in this fire as a result of the offering that Gideon brings, he then understands that he indeed has seen an angel of the Lord, and he is there going to build an altar. And then from here on in, he's already totally devoted to his mission. and will start leading the Israelites out of their misery. That's it for today. Anybody have questions? Now's the time. Unmute yourselves, and love to hear from you. Carol, I see. Oh no, let's see. Who wanted? I don't know. My thing is looking funny. Nobody. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Richard. It's good to see you. It's good to see all of you again.
I have a question, not a question, just a comment. When talking about Gideon and being in the wine press and what brings to mind is when David came, when the Jebusite was threshing, and the angel of the Lord came in. I mean, it's kind of that same thing. I mean,
but he's up. He's in the open. He's up on the temple.
He is in the open. Right.
He's in the open. Right.
Well, and they're threshing. They're up on the hill because they're throwing it up, and the wind is carrying the chaff away. And so, if you're threshing out wheat in the basement, in the wine press, you're having a tough time.
Right.
But if you're surviving, you're surviving.
Exactly.
Good deal.
Great. Thanks for that, Kim. That's a great message.
I hope you enjoyed that video, and we'd like to be sure you're getting all of our video content. So just click on the subscribe button below, as well as on the notification bell, and that way you will have easy access to all our material. We look forward to staying in touch with you. God bless you, and have a wonderful day.